In Italy, the situation is more or less, I would say, in line with Germany. Again, it's a race to the bottom, unfortunately. Yeah, because someone telling us that the Germany is in a worse shape compared to Italy. Other people telling me that Italy is in a worse shape compared to the German situation. But even if we look at the non-paper of, the Commission, the European Commission, then we all can say that both Germany and Italy are in the red zone.
So it is now my great pleasure to introduce Andrea Paltrinieri, who is the Associate Professor of Banking and Finance at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Italy. It's very good to see you, Andrea.
Andreas, thank you for having me here, and it's a great pleasure for me to discuss about, Italy and the energy situation in Europe, So thanks again for the invitation.
My pleasure. So let's start with the maybe most important question right now for Europeans, but also for global investors. Europe is stuck in an energy crisis, but the key question, I guess, is whether Europe will have enough natural gas to make it through the winter heating season here. What's your overall take on the situation in Europe right now, Andrea?
Yeah, my idea is that first of all, we need to understand the overall supply and demand balance of natural gas because there are three important components. So the first one is related to the stock, the second one is related to the production, and the third one is related to the flows. So actually, if we start talking about the stock, actually we are in a rather good place right now. Again, we are in the middle of the five-year average range compared to the stock around Europe. And again, we are closer to 90% overall, so not a bad situation. But on the one side, this stock was really expensive because, all you guys recall the TTF exploded to 350 euro for megawatt hour. And, this was related to the fact that a lot of operators, quasi-government or other, firms were trying to buy the marginal molecule of natural gas in order to stock. So it was expensive, but at the end of the day, right now we are in an average position related to the stocks. And this is important. About the production, we all know that the situation in Europe is completely different compared to the US, for example, where we are, close to the all-time high. Even today, balance is, very close to the all-time high in terms of production. Instead, in Europe, we had, overall decline in production over the last year. And so just in the last few months, we have somewhat higher production, but it's not enough. So my major worry is related to the flows. Actually, we need to start to compare the 2022 flows with the 2021. You know that in 2021, we had 40% of total European consumptions coming from Russia. Right now, as we are talking, we have 9 to 10% of flows coming from Russia because we have just the Suza pipeline getting us a lot of natural gas, I wouldn't say a lot, but the, minimum amount of natural gas. So right now we have not gas from Yamal, we have not gas from Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And so considering those three elements, I can say that we are okay on the stock side, but we need flows. If we are not able to get these marginal 10% of flows, then it could be a real big issue because on the other side, and maybe we talk about that later, the liquefied natural gas market worldwide is maxed out. And so this is a real issue. So we need those flows. And the last point, Andreas, is related to the weather. No one talking about weather, but the weather is the most important factor for the next 3 to 4 months. If the weather is in line with the 10-year average, as the economic minister of Germany told us in the last couple of days, then maybe we are okay. But if the weather is 1 or 2 or 3 standard deviations, higher in terms of heating degrees compared to the 10-year average, then we don't have other, solution than going ahead with the rationing.
And that's basically what we don't want to end up with. But I know, Andrea, you've been preparing a map of the flows of natural gas into Europe, both from Russia, but also from the seaside via the liquid natural gas. So let's have a look at the flows as they look right now. Is it possible to replace the Russian flows with liquid natural gas, and to which extent?
Yeah, Andreas, the situation I do think right now is clear because on the one side, we did whatever was the best option for us. So we were able to diversify in the best way possible the lack of Russian flows. Actually, we overall, if we take into account overall Europe, we increased the flows from Algeria, for example. I can talk about the Transmed pipeline to Italy. We increased the flows from Norway, and it was expensive, but we increased the flows as well. But the lender of last resort is the liquefied natural gas from the US, and I prepare in the map as well. So again, compared to 2021, we had kind of 50 to 60% more liquefied natural gas coming from US from different places. So I can talk about Sabine Pass, I can talk about Corpus Christi, even I can talk about the future Calcasieu. So again, Cheniere, give me the chance to tell this name, gave us a lot of natural gas in order to save Europe, for the next winter. But again, one point is I have to make clear one point. So we had this natural gas. We were able to stock this natural gas thanks to TTF, but this natural gas was expensive. And on the one side, right now we maxed out the import of natural gas from US, waiting for Freeport, because we all expecting Freeport coming back in November, and it's able to manage kind of 2.2 billion of cubic feet a day. So it's a good amount, but not impressive. And so even if we have all this natural gas, it will be very difficult to substitute the marginal molecule coming from Russia. So this 9% of total consumption will be very difficult to be substituted. Also because Qatar, unfortunately, has already maxed out its production. So the major risk is related to this winter and maybe to the following one. Then maybe from 2025, 2026, maybe we can have an oversupply of natural gas. But for the next 2 to 3 winter, Mother Nature, if Mother Nature is, okay with us, then this could be a real issue.
Yeah. Fingers crossed ahead of this winter, Andrea. We've been talking a lot about the German natural gas storage and the energy situation in Germany overall, in US media, but also in Anglo-Saxon media in general. But I also want to point to the fact that natural gas is an important energy resource for Italy, where you're from, right? So why don't you give us sort of an overview of the energy situation in Italy specifically?
Yeah, in Italy, the situation is more or less, I would say, in line with Germany. Again, it's a race to the bottom, unfortunately. Yeah, because someone telling us that the Germany is in a worse shape compared to Italy. Other people telling me that Italy is in a worse shape compared to the German situation. But even if you look at the non-paper of, the Commission, the European Commission, then we all can say that both Germany and Italy are in the red zone. So again, the dependence, even for Italy and for Germany, from Russian natural gas is impressive. And for Italy, maybe is a little more acute compared to Germany. But again, even Italy did a good job in diversify the sources, because on the one side we maximized the Algerian import, and on the other side we maximized the Norway import through Switzerland. So we can do more for sure. And Andreas, which is the main factor for the next several months to consider? The floating storage or regasification unit. This will make the difference. So again, in Germany, for example, for 2023, in Germany, they will have five floating storage regasification unit, and they will be able to manage a kind of 25 billion meter cubic of gas. In Italy, we are talking about just 3 floating storage regasification units, but we keep postponing the period in which they are able to manage gas. So this will be our challenge for the next, I would say, the next year. And again, it will be important to have them because the marginal unit of natural gas will come from liquefied natural gas. And we cannot build a stable, a stable building in order to manage liquefied natural gas. We need FSRU. If you're not able to get them, then the situation will be difficult. This is related to the volume. The second point, obviously, will be related to the price. Whoever call about the potential cap on TTF or whatever has no idea because, for example, next year, Germany will have a lot of bid on liquefied natural gas in order to get gas for, their floating storage regasification unit. And maybe Italy will have a bid as well. So again, we want gas for Italy and for Germany as well. But yeah, we have to pay it, and we have to pay more than our Asia counterparts. So we have to pay more the Japan and Korea market, the classic JKM. So this is the problem. And again, for Italy, even the situation can be a little bit worse because we use a lot of gas even for electricity. And so it's really difficult to substitute it in a shorter time of period.
If we look at the political discussion in Germany, I've been following that quite fiercely over the past couple of months, and it's very clear that the German politicians are sort of trying to prepare the population for potential worst case scenarios with energy rationing, potential blackouts, and stuff like that. It's part of the discussion in German media and in German politics. But if we look at the debate in Italy, what's sort of the political strategy being implemented by Italian politicians, and how do they communicate to the population right now?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, Andreas, because, several months ago, I was fighting with some macros guys in Germany because they, were telling me, oh, Andrea, you cannot have TTF at 250, 300, 350. And I told them, well, much depends on the supply-demand balance. And unfortunately, we got it, and we got 350. That was a price, recall well, was a price that acted in a ration way. So already some of the price acted as a ration element. But if we go into Italy debate, and if I can compare the Italy debate with the German one, right now I really prefer the German debate because they are clear in a way that even yesterday, if we don't have a mild winter, then we may have some rationing. In Italy, instead, all parties actually, they call for cap on natural gas. They call just for extra profit of firms, and they have no clue about the situation of the overall net gas market. So Andreas, just tell me the party's opinion. Even if I don't have to call the right party, but again, in general, the situation is this one. All parties call for the cap. And they call for the cap or on TTF, and this is, this will be bloody in the medium term for us, for the discussion we just had, because on the one side, it will be very difficult to implement, because what does it mean a cap on TTF like the parties call? It means that you put a cap just on the first expiration date or just along the forward curve. So again, it's even impossible to have, but they keep calling a cap on TTF without having a clue. And again, you well know what Cheniere will do in this case. So again, the LNG flotilla will go elsewhere. On the other side, instead, they call for a cap of Russia gas. And again, this could be a high risk scenario as well, a high risk call. Why? Because we already saw that the first, couple of weeks ago, when we called about the potential cap on Russia gas, then they stopped in Russia the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And so again, if we go ahead with this calling, then which could be the reaction of the Russia counterpart, could be the stop also of the Suez pipeline, which is right now pretty important because we cannot substitute it in the shorter term. And so calling for the cap and calling just for the profits of firm is not the right way to go, but is the right way where all the parties carry out the public campaigns. So again, I see just one party, the center one, calling about some kind of rationing that maybe, could be the right solution right now. And I agree with that, because on the one side, I agree that we can invest in the renewable stuff. But on the other side right now, if we announce to the market a potential, rationing, it could have a good effect on the prices. But again, it's just one party. And on the dark side, I would add, the most parties, call just for cap and call just for, I don't want a floating storage regasification unit because they are no environment and so on. So this is our public campaign, Andreas, unfortunately.
We'll get back to the political discussion because we obviously have that election coming up already this Sunday. We're filming the 21st of September, just for the information. But I also wanted to touch upon the topic of natural gas as an input source of electricity production in Italy. Where I'm from in Denmark, natural gas is mostly used in heating. But not to a large extent in the electricity production. But if I calculate it correctly, I think natural gas makes up more than 50% of the overall electricity production in Italy in a normal year, right? So how important is natural gas in the sort of electricity system in Italy, in your view, Andrea?
Yeah, Andreas, this is a very important point because, in general in Europe, natural gas is important for what we call the RESCOM demand, so the residential and commercial demand, and even for the industrial demand. But in Italy, the percentage of natural gas used for the electricity is pretty high, more than 50%. And so right now, what we can do, the first stuff is to have the much possible natural gas, unfortunately, and that's why I would say, in a good way, the actual government right now with Draghi again for a couple of more days, acted in a good way, trying to have the most natural gas possible from Sonatrach, so from Algeria, for example, both through pipeline and either through the liquefied natural gas. And on the other way, they try to sign some, long-term contract with other places in Africa. I'm not a supporter of this kind of long-term contract because the stability of Africa, you well know, Andreas, is not, huge. Just to, use a kind term. So, but in a way or in the other, for the next 2 years, more or less, maybe 3, we will be able to get our natural gas. Personally, what I prefer would be to go on the west side and maybe sign a contract with Rio Grande and with the other liquefied natural gas hub in US, so maybe they are more stable. But again, in the short term, whoever win the election, cannot do a lot. So again, right now, in order to go ahead, in order to go through this winter, we just need to have much natural gas possible. Another point, Andreas, is this one. Unfortunately, there are a lot of renewable projects in Italy, and they were stopped for the environment, some environment stuff. Again, if it's not a good place to build this kind of infrastructure, then I cannot authorize it. So it is an important problem in Italy, and I hope that the next government will be able to solve it, because we need a higher percentage of renewable in our bouquet, in our mix of electricity.
I also wanted to touch upon the sort of discussion of the political backdrop in Italy heading into this energy crisis. Most people in the global investment community will probably know the last Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, from his time at the European Central Bank, right? But he's no longer running for office in the upcoming election. I mean, it seems as if there are sort of plenty of scenarios in play ahead of this election. So what's your take on sort of the political situation heading into this election and the spillovers to this energy crisis?
About the political situation, I don't think right now it really mattered a lot in the financial markets environment. This is my idea. Think about some indicators, okay? Think about the spread, for example, between our BTP and our Bund. They have been pretty stable around 220, 225. So a really different situation compared to the European government, crisis in 2011, 2012. So again, even if we talk about the bond market, you see the Bund today close to 2%, the 10-year Bund, and you see our BTP just close to 4%, but this was related, I think, more related to, for example, yesterday PPI in Germany, the Purchase Producer Index. So again, the inflation, we all have the inflation from 8 to 10% compared to the different, countries. So again, my point is that right now, the actual debate and the political situation had not a huge impact in financial market. This is the first point. The second point is related to the fact that the economic backdrop for now, as it is not that bad. I do think it will get worse down the road, especially in Q4. This is my idea. But as our Prime Minister Mario Draghi told us a couple of days ago, before, then he told us, but yeah, at the end of the day, we are not yet in the recession. We already had 3.5% of GDP growth already in 2022. And so right now, I cannot see a huge recession down the road. Again, this is related to the GDP. On the other side, Andreas, we have some kind of, macros indicators that we need to take into account, especially for the next government. And those are related to the deficit with GDP that for 2022 is close to 6%, and on the other side the debt on GDP that is higher than 150%. Why those indicators are important for the next government? Because obviously, since you cannot put those cap in energy world like we discussed, then maybe there are some parties calling from a huge government intervention. Okay, but if we, for example, like someone calling right now a 30 billion euro help for firms or for consumers, maybe you well know what I'm referring to, then it's difficult for us to, for example, add 30 billion euros each month. Because on the one side, there is the risk to go, close to 8% on deficit GDP. On the other side, if we have a collapse of the growth on Q1 2023, for example, we can have a debt of GDP, higher than 160%. And so, maybe Andreas is not the best framework for the next government. And on the other side, maybe ECB should jump into our situation.
Yeah, at least that is what some people fear ahead of this winter if Italy needs the support from the European Central Bank again at a time of very high inflation. But one of the scenarios that I get a lot of questions on at Real Vision is the scenario of a right-wing government being formed in Italy after the election. So we have this woman called Giorgia Meloni. She's the head of the party called the Brotherhood of Italy. I think that's the English translation of Fratelli d'Italia, right? And I mean, we've seen a lot of articles around the possibility of her being the next prime minister in the media. Sorry. So what do you make of this election? Is it a possible scenario, or what's sort of the scenarios ahead of us here?
Yeah, I do think, Andreas, that this is the most likely scenario. So we all think here that I would say the far right, because there is, at the end of the day, the coalition with, the more center right with Berlusconi and even with Salvini as well, that is the Lega one. Maybe at the end of the day, there will be this kind of coalition. But the most likely outcome will be Giorgia Meloni as the next prime minister right now. So again, which will be the consequences of that? Again, on the energy side, if you ask me, then I can tell you my opinion. Not will change. You will not have a lot of changes because at the end of the day, it's very difficult that you can take some decision, for example, related to the cap alone. You will have to join the European Union in any kind of decision. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for a single country. So this is my perception. At the end of the day, a lot of public campaign, a lot of talks, but I'm not sure they will do, something without Europe. And this is from the energy side. But on the Italia side, I would say on macro side, then the public campaign told me that they want to spend. They want to spend a lot. Think about the potential flat tax, or think about, they want to do a lot of investments. And so the public spending, I'm okay with that, but I am not sure that I have a lot of covering for that. And this is my, what I'm thinking right now. So they win the public spend, but, the problem with the deficit and the debt to GDP will be higher. I have also to be honest, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, the same Giorgia Meloni tried to, reassure the market, telling them that we are not stupid and we well know that we need to stay within the European framework. So I do think that at the end of the day, they will make those decisions within the EU framework. Otherwise, we go back to the previous point and the two protection, the TPI, so the to protect Italy mechanism, we all called it in Italy. So the TPI instrument, for the ECB could come in action. That's the point, Andreas.
Yeah, I also think that is clearly a potential scenario already for this winter. I wanted to ask for your take on some of the comments made by Matteo Salvini, who's the head of the Northern League Party. I think that's the English translation of Lega Nord. He's been quite vocal in the media in recent weeks around the sanctions on Russia, right? He's basically debating whether the European Union would be better off lifting those sanctions in order to be able to buy Russian natural gas again. Is that a discussion that is part of the political debate in Italy ahead of this election?
Well, this is really a difficult situation, Andreas. I thought about this question down the last, couple of days as well. Again, I don't think this will be at the center of the public debate. There were some documents we read that tried to rule out the impact of the Russia, overall political situation on Italy. And, during the last couple of days, and even, I would say the last week or so, Salvini try to, get a distance, with Putin. Even yesterday, he told that, was for once, 3 to 4 years ago, I was a friend of Putin because he was a good guy and so on. But after the war, then he's no more my friend, So more or less, this is the last debate and the last relationship between Salvini and Russia at all. I wouldn't say that this is the center of the Italian debate right now. It's more related to the, flat tax. It's more related to the cap. It's more related to the fact that the new government will have to help the firms and even with the budget. But is in the framework, is in the background, and I cannot say no on that. But if you ask me, Andreas, if, for example, Salvini wins, he can, have a alliance with Putin, then again, my answer is no, because, at the end of the day, the situation is completely different compared to what we had in 2011. Here we have a good support from a good support for euro, and for European Union. And so I don't want they want to lose some kind of sharing and some kind of voting just to, leave Europe on the other side or going into a kind of Italexit like we had in 2011. So I do think they will, in any case, act within the European Union framework.
I've been trying to sort of calculate the overall size of the bill of this energy crisis across the various European countries in recent days. And it is tricky to come up with a very precise number. But as far as I can calculate, it seems as if the energy cost as a percent of the gross domestic product is now around 8 to 10% of GDP in most European countries. What do you think will happen in Italian politics with this bill? Because someone obviously has to pay, right? Will it be the public sector, the private sector? Who takes the bill here?
Yeah, and again, like in the natural gas market, Andreas, unfortunately, I have not solutions because we need to think about that. At the end of the day, during the last 10 years, we had a high concentration risk, no? And so we cannot solve in 6 months a situation that has been generated over the last, 10 years. But if you ask me right now, what we can do and what the next government can do or will do, I wouldn't guess that, they just need to give money to all. Because if they give money to all firms, people, consumer households, then the deficit to GDP, like you said, will skyrocket, and we cannot. Italy is not in the right place to afford it. So at the end of the day, maybe they can target the low-income population, like Mario Draghi is doing right now, in order to get a direct financing. Because if we talk about the other, I would define exotic plan, like the the subsidies of natural gas, electricity power, or like the tope in Spain and in Portugal situation, or the cap on the renewables revenues, then all those measures in Italy will be very difficult to apply because we have a lot of interconnections with other, countries. And so we are not in the same position of Spain and Portugal, for example. And so if you ask me, the new government, what should do, maybe targeting some support to low income, households and maybe some firms. But what we'll do, I do think that they will support all the firms and all the households, and there will be a difficult moment to get through the winter, especially if we go into a higher range of the debt to GDP level.
One of the things that I've discussed with investors, basically since the 2011 debt crisis in Southern Europe, is the risk of Italy or other Southern European countries leaving the Eurozone, right? We had the situation where markets started to become worried about that exact scenario when the aforementioned Matteo Salvini became part of the government a few years back. But is it something that we should worry about refueling as a theme? Do you think if we get Giorgia Meloni voted in as the new prime minister, is it something that we should worry about?
Yeah, my short answer, Andreas, is no. I don't think right now you could worry about it because they all know that right now there is a huge support from the Italian population to the Europe in general. But again, obviously they born as a parties, especially Salvini, like the Italexit or whatever, and so the background was that one. But right now the coalition is formed not only is formed also with Berlusconi, that is the on the best side of his approach, is a European style guy on this side. So I would reassure the institutional investor that we cannot go out or do some kind of Italexit. On another side, Andreas, another important point, and especially our banking sector. I do think it's worth mentioning that because, in 2011, the banking sector and the loop between, the asset side of the banking balance sheet and the BTP was impressive. And I do think that a lot of institutional investors were scared about that. Right now, fortunately, the loop is less sensitive, I would say, because our banking sector is more stable, is higher capitalized compared to the past. And there is another important thing to understand, that this is the relation between the interest margin of the most important Italian banks and the rate hikes made by ECB. So each kind of 100 basis point of rate hikes is a kind of $1 billion of new, revenues for both Intesa Sanpaolo and UniCredit. And so those new revenues can support more non-performing loans. And I do think that when we talk about the new government and when we talk about the situation of Italian, the economic of Italian situation, and we need to take into account also the banking sector, because we are an important banking system in terms of financial system as well. So again, the situation is more solid. I would assure the investor about that, and I would rule out actually the Italexit, and let me say even the Grexit or whatever other countries right now and for the nearest future.
So final point I wanted to make in relation to this debate on a potential Italexit. I tend to agree with you that it's a very low risk scenario, by the way, but we've been sort of accustomed to the European Central Bank buying a lot of the Italian bonds, right? It was simply needed through times of turbulence. And as I hear you, it may be needed again this winter. But who are the sort of the buyers of Italian bonds? Are the local banks involved, for example?
Yeah, I agree with you that we had a lot of support, through the years from European Central Bank. We recall all the outright monetary transaction and then the different quantitative easing. And so, with different, scenarios over the last 10 years. So, that right now, even if we are talking about the, rate hiking and maybe several slots of 50 to 75 BP rate hikes, I do think that in this tightening world, then the ECB will take into account the peaks situation, because in this way, Italy is an issue, but again, maybe Greece can be another issue after our political election, and even, the other, I would say, peripheral countries. So again, why and which kind of institutional investor can buy our bonds? At the end of the day, let's talk about our economic situation. I'm not here to support the bond. Obviously, I cannot make any kind of recommendation, but again, it's important to understand our environment. For now, at the end of the day, for 2022, we had a decent growth. And this banking system again is solid and will be solid. And maybe the most important Italian banks will have a good revenues down the road. Those are important in terms of NPL. If the new government, try to not, I would say, not spend a lot, or on the other way, if they are able to find some kind of covering of the public expenses, then I would say that the debt to GDP can go down to 140, 135% over the next 4 to 5 years. Obviously, we need some growth. And I agree with you, Andreas, that over the next year, the growth, not only in Italy, but maybe in EU, will be difficult to achieve. So we need to enlarge our time horizon. It's a news of today that, for example, Deutsche Bank, went out with a report, calling for a 2.2% GDP loss in Germany for 2023. So again, obviously we need natural gas. I don't lie, for the next couple of years. And so the less we have natural gas, and the more difficult will be to get gas and to refill the stocks, the worse the situation will be also in the economic side. So again, I wouldn't talk about Italy just because it was a problem of Europe in 2011, 2012. We have a lot of problems, bureaucracy, and even the high public spending and so on. But right now we are more stable, and I do think that if we are able to control our debt to GDP, then a lot of institutional investors will be easier to buy, not next year maybe, but down the road, our BTP at the spread of 250, 300 level that I do think will be the right spread after the new government. Hopefully I'm wrong and the spread will go down to, 150 or 100, but this is my idea, Andreas.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, Andrea. My final question for you relates to the scenario where Mother Nature brings us a very bad winter season. We face a lack of energy across the European continent, and each and every country will sort of have to take care of itself in such a situation, right? Worst case scenario. What do you think will happen in Italy if Italy really needs to ration energy? What would be the plan?
My idea, and I would say here, unfortunately, is that in the European Union, we don't have and we haven't got a common approach in dealing with natural gas, for example, buying. And we, saw that during the September spike of TTF, when all the governments and quasi-government firms tried to buy natural gas in order to put in the ground. And so this will be a situation where each country will act, I do think, in order to protect the same country interests. This is my framework. I hope I'm wrong, but this is what I checked over the last few weeks. And so, which is the point? If we have a winter with, I would say, 2 standard deviation higher heating degrees compared to the 10-year average, we will not have enough gas. We will not have enough gas in Italy, and we will not have enough gas in Germany as well. So, like the economic minister of Germany yesterday told us. And so, which will be, Andreas, the only thing to do during in the potential scenario is not to play with the stocks. So, for example, the German economic minister told us, oh yeah, I can play with the stock, I can reduce the stock at the minimum in order to manage it. But hey, if the February weather, is terribly cold, then it will be an issue. You can stay cold like our Texas friends a couple of years ago. So, it's really an issue. So which is the only way to do when you don't have gas, and it's called rationing. Unfortunately, you have to program rationing. In the tail case scenario, I just would have a parallel program when I can announce a potential rationing, because right now it's not an issue of price, but it's an issue of volume. And if it's an issue of volume, you cannot have as much as natural gas liquefied as you want, because you cannot have floating storage gasification unit. And so you need to go ahead with the gas you have. So rationing, and this is the only answer I can give you, Andreas.
Yeah. And I think, again, the final conclusion is fingers crossed ahead of this winter. Andrea Paltrinieri, it was a great pleasure to host you at the Real Vision platform. My best wishes from Denmark to you in Italy.
Andreas, thank you for this interview. It was a pleasure for me, and I'm saying hello to all of you guys.
We hope to see you back. Thank you. It was a great pleasure to discuss the situation in Italy with Andrea Paltrinieri. He's obviously very knowledgeable around the local natural gas market in Europe. And he was probably slightly more upbeat than I would have expected him to be ahead of this interview. First of all, he sees a very solid backing for the European Union and the Euro project in Italy. And he backs that up with most recent surveys among the Italian population on these exact topics. So he doesn't see it as a large risk that Italy would try and sort of cater a deal with the Russians after the election on Sunday. I probably hold a slightly different view on that question, but it was a very compelling case made by Andrea from Italy on this exact topic. But he's also very clear that if Mother Nature doesn't play ball, so to speak, this winter, Italy will lack the natural gas needed for heating and potentially also for electricity production. So there are scenarios where Italy will have to ration natural gas to a very large extent. And that is, of course, a negative for the Italian economy, which will likely run with public deficits again this winter. And by the end of the day, also need the support from the European Central Bank for its government bond market again. And that was maybe the key takeaway from my interview with Andrea. You should not buy the Italian bonds ahead of this winter, or at least you should wait until the European Central Bank steps in again and protects the Italian bond market from the current turmoil, because Italy will have to face this winter with a lot of obstacles, and the public deficit may be relatively large as a consequence. That was all. Thank you for watching.
We hope you enjoyed the video. At Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy with in-depth analysis from real experts. Join the revolution at realvision.com.